You know that moment when your own child looks you in the eyes and makes it brutally clear that you're no longer mom or dad to them, just a walking wallet. Imagine you've worked 2 jobs, skipped new clothes, skipped vacations, quietly gone without so your kid could have a future, and then one day he tells you that his girlfriend's opinion matters more than yours. Imagine he tells you if you don't pay for the life they want, you're toxic and controlling. Now imagine instead of screaming or begging, you smile, step back, and slowly show him exactly who raised him. Would you still help him? Or would you let him feel what it's like when the bank of mom finally closes? I'm not some perfect parent. I'm a tired, middle-aged woman who's made a lot of mistakes and swallowed a lot of disrespect to keep the peace in a very loud, very dramatic, very toxic family. I'm the one who stayed. I worked the early shifts, the late shifts, the side gigs. My ex-husband tapped out when our son Jake was 10, so it was just me and this kid against the world. At least, that's what I thought for the longest time. Turns out it was me against the world, and against my own kid. Jake was always charming, the kind of kid teachers loved and other moms complimented. So polite, so well-spoken, you've done such a good job, they'd tell me at school events. What they didn't see was the way he rolled his eyes at me when we got home, or the way he slammed his bedroom door when I said no to something we couldn't afford. But I brushed it off as teenage attitude. Reddit stories about toxic sons and entitled people always felt extreme to me. That wasn't my boy. Not really. Not my Jake. Money was always tight. I work as a nurse, so I make enough to survive, but not enough to breathe. Still, I planned ahead. Every extra shift, every bit of overtime, a piece of that went into a savings account with Jake's initials on it. Not that he knew the full story. He just knew college somehow seemed possible and that mom always found a way. Hidden sacrifices are easier when no one's watching you bleed. I canceled birthdays for myself, skipped haircuts, lived in the same worn-out sneakers. All so there would be something waiting for him at 18. By the time Jake was a senior in high school, things were finally looking up. He got into a decent college, nothing fancy, but good enough to open doors. I felt this quiet pride, the kind that doesn't scream or post on Facebook, but just sits in your chest and glows. Then he met her. Her name is Vanessa, and if Reddit AITA could design a girlfriend, she'd be the main character in every toxic family drama and betrayal story. Vanessa was pretty loud and always on, the first time he brought her over. She hugged me like we were old friends and immediately started talking about her dreams. Influencer, content creator, lifestyle brand. She listed them all out like a vision board. There's nothing wrong with ambition. But what bothered me was how she never once asked about Jake's plans without twisting them back to herself. If he mentioned studying, she'd say, "Well, when you're making real money, you can invest in my brand." It was a joke. Until it wasn't. Little things started changing. Jake stopped coming home for dinner on time. When he did, he was glued to his phone, texting her under the table. I'd ask, "How's school? How are your classes?" And he'd shrug and say, "Fine, Mom, relax." When I brought up practical stuff like scholarships, work study, budgeting, he'd get defensive. Why are you so negative? Other people's parents help them? Why is everything always a struggle with you? That one stung more than I let him see. One night, I heard them talking on speakerphone while he was in the living room. He didn't realize I was in the hallway, folding laundry. She said, "Honestly, if your mom really cared, she'd help us get started. We're adults now. She should want us to win." Then she laughed and added, "I swear. Some parents just love to keep their kids stuck so they feel needed." He didn't defend me. He just sighed and said, "Yeah, she's old school. It's like she doesn't get real life." What happened next shocked me more than I expected. In that moment, my own son sounded like a stranger. Then he did something I'll never forget. He stood up, took out his phone, and put me on speaker while he called Vanessa. "Babe, I told you," he said, staring right at me. "She doesn't get it. She's refusing to help. She's acting all controlling and guilt-trippy." I heard her voice bright and sharp. "Wow, that's really disappointing. My friend's mom literally paid their full rent for a year so they could focus on their relationship and careers. I guess your mom just wants to keep you stuck in her toxic little world. I said his name once, quietly. He ignored me. He nodded along while she kept talking. Honestly, Jake, you're an adult. You don't need her permission. She won't help you. Maybe you should just move out and cut contact for a while. Sometimes you've got to show entitled people you won't be controlled. The irony of her calling me entitled almost made me dizzy. Then Jake pulled the trigger. You're right, he said. She doesn't support us. I'm done letting her run my life. He hung up and said, so here's how it's going to be. Either you help us with the apartment and cosign, or I'm moving in with Vanessa's family and we're going no contact until you respect my decisions. No contact. The word I'd seen in our relationships, Reddit AITA, and those brutal family drama posts. Hearing it from my own son felt like someone had reached inside my chest and twisted, but something in me went very still. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't panicking, scrambling, begging. I looked at him and suddenly saw not my little boy, but a grown man testing how far he could push me, testing whether I really had a spine. And in that moment, I decided he was about to find out exactly who raised him. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just said very softly, okay. He blinked. Okay. What? I met his eyes. Okay, you're an adult. You get to make your choices. If you want to move in with Vanessa's family and cut contact because I won't give you money and destroy my own credit, that's your decision. His mouth dropped open a little. That wasn't the script he expected. He was ready for the emotional story, the meltdown, the dramatic begging. Not calm acceptance. Then came the final straw. I got home from a 12-hour shift and noticed the drawer in my bedroom, the one where I keep important papers, was slightly open. I'd never leave it like that. My heart started pounding. I opened it and saw that the envelope with my bank statements was out of place. I checked my email. 3 missed notifications from the bank, all marked as unusual account activity. My hands shook as I logged in. There it was. 3 attempted transfers from my savings account to Jake's checking. All declined because the online daily limit had been reached. He had tried to move thousands behind my back. He knew the bank name, but not the security questions. He had guessed enough to trigger the alerts, but not enough to succeed. He had actually tried to steal from me. My son, the kid I used to carry on my back when he got too tired to walk. What happened next shocked me, but not because of him, because of me. I didn't break down. I didn't run to his room screaming. I quietly printed the alerts, put them in a folder, and sat at the kitchen table to wait. When he came home, I was already there, a cup of tea in front of me, the folder beside it. He walked in, saw my face, and rolled his eyes. What now? He asked. I slid the papers toward him. Want to explain this? He barely glanced at them. I was just trying to move what's mine, he said. Stop being dramatic. Something inside me snapped back into place, not broken, aligned. That money is not yours, I said evenly. 'Tis my savings, in my name. I plan to use most of it to help you. You just tried to steal it. That's a crime, Jake. And don't you ever tell me I'm being dramatic when I catch you breaking the law in my house. He crossed his arms. Wow, so now I'm a criminal. You're unbelievable. Vanessa was right. You are toxic. You've been hoarding money and acting like a victim. You could make our lives easier, but you'd rather cling to control. He actually tried to gaslight me about money I had earned while he was sleeping in a warm bed I paid for. But that was only the beginning of my revenge story. The next day, while he was out, I met with my landlord. We sat at that same kitchen table, but this time I was the one with the numbers. I told him I was interested in buying the duplex if our agreement could include a long enough closing timeline and a fair price. We worked out something that, thanks to my hoarded savings and a first-time buyer program, was surprisingly within reach. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. By the end of the meeting, I had started paperwork on buying the home my son was currently taking for granted. Then I went to the bank in person. I moved a large portion of my savings into a new account at a completely different bank and set up every security measure available. I left just enough in the old account to avoid suspicion, nothing more. I updated my will. I wrote a letter to myself in case I started doubting this later, reminding future me of the bank alerts, the insults, the threats of no contact. This wasn't petty. This was self-defense. A few nights later, Jake announced at dinner, if you can call him scrolling through his phone while I ate dinner together, that he and Vanessa were probably moving out by the end of the month. Her parents said we can stay with them temporarily while we look for an apartment. So, prepare yourself. Don't freak out. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like I'd be lost without him throwing dirty dishes in the sink. I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I felt something new. Relief. That's what you've decided? I said, then okay. You're an adult. You choose your life. His eyes narrowed. You're not going to try to stop me? I almost laughed. You made it very clear you don't want my input. I'm respecting that. I could see the confusion flicker behind his anger. Control only works if the other person plays along. Move-out day came faster than I expected. He tossed clothes into trash bags, made loud comments on the phone like, yeah, man, finally getting out of this place. No more guilt trips. No more manipulation. Vanessa's car pulled up, music blasting. She didn't bother coming inside. He wheeled his one suitcase to the door, then turned to me. Last chance, he said. You could still help us get set up, Be part of our future instead of stuck in your past. I walked up to him, kissed his cheek, and said, Jake, I love you. But I will not fund my own disrespect. When you're ready to be my son again and not just a customer at the bank of Mom, you know where I live? His face hardened. Wow, you really chose money over me? I shook my head. No, I chose self-respect over being used. He left without hugging me. The door closed. The house went quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. The first week alone was rough. I'd catch myself listening for his keys in the door, or glancing at my phone expecting a text that never came. I stalked our relationships and other Reddit stories late at night, half looking for someone who'd lived through something like this, half hating that my life now sounded like a betrayal story strangers would argue about in the comments. But slowly, the silence became peaceful. No slamming doors. No muttered insults. No feeling like a stranger in my own home. 2 months later, I closed on the duplex. I signed the papers with hands that were still a little shaky, but this time it was from something close to pride. For the first time in my life, I owned something that no one could threaten to take from me. Not a husband, not a boss, not even my son. This little, slightly run-down place was mine. My name on the deed. My future secure, at least in one concrete way. Of course, that's exactly when Jake came back. He showed up on a rainy Thursday, unannounced, dripping water on my welcome mat. He looked thinner, more tired, less sure. Hey, he said, like he hadn't gone nuclear and moved out with a declaration of no contact. I let him in. He stood awkwardly in the kitchen, looking around like the place had changed, even though nothing obvious had. So, how's it going? He asked. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Eventually, he sighed. Okay, look. Things with Vanessa's parents are complicated. He went on to explain that living there wasn't the dream he'd imagined. They had rules, expectations. They didn't like him coming in late or not paying for groceries. They weren't thrilled about funding to adults who spent hours on TikTok instead of working. Imagine that. The toxic mom suddenly didn't look so bad. Then he dropped the real bomb. We broke up, he said. She kind of used the money her parents gave us to start her brand and then started seeing someone else who could offer more stability. He said the words bitterly, like he'd just swallowed broken glass. The very entitlement and selfishness he'd weaponized against me had come back to bite him. It would have been satisfying revenge if it didn't hurt so much to see my kid in pieces. We sat at the table, the same table where we'd had every major fight of our lives. And he finally started talking like my son again. He admitted he'd tried to take the money. He admitted Vanessa had pushed him. He admitted he thought because I'd always sacrificed, I always would, that I'd fold if he pushed hard enough. He said, I thought you were weak. Mom, I thought you needed me more than I needed you. I looked him straight in the eye and said, then you finally learned who raised you. He frowned. I explained, not angrily, but clearly, how I'd moved the money, how I'd bought the duplex, how I decided that my future couldn't depend on a son who saw me as an ATM. I didn't do it to punish you, I said. I did it because I will not be destroyed by the very person I spent my life protecting. He was quiet for a long time. Then, in a small voice I hadn't heard since he was a child, he said, I'm sorry. Not the performative sorry, the real one. The kind that comes with lowered shoulders and wet eyes. He asked if he could move back in for a little while he figured things out. Old me would have said yes before he finished the sentence. The mom who finally knew her worth paused. Here's what I'm willing to do, I said. You can stay in the smaller bedroom. You will pay a modest rent and contribute to utilities. You will not have access to my accounts, my paperwork, or my credit. You will get a job and start contributing to your own future. I will not discuss loans or apartments or girlfriends. I am your mother, not your bank and not your backup plan. If you can agree to that, you can stay. If not, you're an adult. You'll figure something out. Now, months later, things are better, not perfect. We still have tense moments. He still has flashes of entitlement, and I still have scars from hearing my own son call me toxic and selfish. But he works. He pays rent. He cooks dinner twice a week. Sometimes I catch him looking at me like he's trying to unlearn old habits and see me as a whole person, not just the exhausted background character in his story. My son betrayed me for his girlfriend, and in that betrayal, he forced me to grow a spine I should have had years ago. He forced me to prove to both of us who raised him. And now, every time he hands me his share of the rent and says, thanks for letting me stay, Mom, I don't feel used. I feel like I finally stepped into the role I always should have had. Not the martyr, not the victim, but the parent who knows her worth. Let me know in the comments, what would you have done in this situation? And don't forget to subscribe to Golden Years Diary for more stories like this.